Welcome everybody to Haworth Art Gallery. My name is Sam, and with me...
Today.
Excellent. I'm here as a representative of the Haworth collection, while Jahday will tell us more about his own work that is exhibited alongside the Tiffany. So it's going to be a very fluid conversation in which we're going to see...
Any questions as well, just pop them in, because a lot of processes, you kind of need a bit of a, how do you get that, how do you get that? So yeah, don't be shy to just say, where do you get to that point? So yeah, by all means,
Excellent. So shall we start by introducing maybe the pieces a little bit and talking why we put them together? And
you can start with the Tiffany.
Perfect. So we are in a room of many favorites, as you might have seen going around. We're very lucky that we have such rare examples all together. And one of them is the aquamarine piece. Aquamarine, very visible by the green tinted color of the glass. This piece was inspired after one of Tiffany's trip to Bahamas. He was fascinated by nature, and he was very interested in actually exploring underwater life as well, and looking and taking inspiration from things around him. So what he did when he came back to New York, he sent his gaffer to have a look, Arthur Sanders, and let him experience and make his own interpretation of what he was looking at and then making the piece. So we can see here a little bit, not only the figure of Tiffany that we all know, but a little bit of different names, collaboration, and people that we tend not to talk about, the people behind the curtains. The piece, as you can see, is stunning. We start with clear transparent glass and clear green tinted glass, and we can see a depression of about 2 inches on the top that helps to give the idea of the fullness of the vase. All the pieces that you can see, all the individual goldfish, the seaweed, and the pebbles, they've been done individually. So you can imagine that doing them all, having these cold pieces and then putting them into hot glass. We call it a vase a little bit against the science because it's so tricky to do, and it puts the whole process through so much stresses. And they weren't just content with placing the pieces, they wanted to emulate an underwater current, as you can see. So all the seaweed follow a specific movement. The fish not only have been put at different heights, but also different directions as well. So it looks like they're swimming around. For the fact that you put something cold into something hot, you can see air bubbles. But that works perfectly well because we are in an underwater scene. And then what we can see as well is that with the light, we have different color of the grass of the seabed that gives even more this example of three-dimensionality to it. And not content with it, to accentuate the movement, they grinded the bottom of the glass as well. There are very, very few examples of these pieces, and we can understand why, because the process was risky. There must have been a lot of trials, but they succeeded to do quite a few of them. And I think this can be the first point of conversation with Jahday, because we've highlighted a few themes that you share with your piece, don't you?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. The piece on the left, Aquamarine, there's a brief series, comes from, where I'm from. So it's looking at how can I represent my background in Bermuda. And the gaffer or the glass craftsman was sent to Bahamas, Bahamas to envision the surrounding into the work. So a different direction than I am. And when we were making this piece, which was about 6 years ago, we looked at how we could embed the maker into the work. How can we go beyond just glass techniques and things that look pretty, and more conceptually, how can we put ourselves into the work? So this piece here is actually a sound wave of me blowing the glass which was recorded on an iPhone. And then the iPhone sent this 2D sound wave to the computer. Using a revolve technique, you can basically revolve a 2D format into a 3D. So once you have that 3D rendering of the wave pattern, that gets sent to a CNC, which is a milling machine, and then the wood is basically sculpted from that sound wave. And you make a two-piece mold to then get the exact rotation and sound pattern of me blowing the glass. So it was a, I think, 6 months project, but it really pushed, how you can think of alternatives of glass, or how you could, conceptually manifest something from the digital world, or capturing or freezing a moment in time into the work. So it's 6 years ago, I made that blow, Yeah. It's quite fascinating, process, as opposed to this, where it's like, he was there taking in the elements and trying to capture what he saw, or what he felt represented the island. It's a bit more literal, you're capturing the environment, as opposed to capturing, I would say, another dimension.
Yes.
Within the making, So capturing the process, and then here you're capturing the world, So it's quite, it's a lot. There's a lot to the. It'd be nice to have the mold, actually, because the mold, you can see how it was formed, and I was able to get about 23 pieces from one mold, and then it starts to deteriorate just from all the heat. And it's also representing the color of the ocean back home, having that deep blue, which also gets a bit more strong at the base. And if you kind of move up and down the piece, you can see a wave pattern inside the work. So as you kind of like move up and down, the rippling from the outside texturizing creates a sort of distorted element at the base. So if you move with the piece, you can also see a movement of the wave pattern, which actually we didn't intend to happen. It was after we made it.
You realize that?
Yeah. We put it out of the mold, and then I was co-working it, and then I noticed that there was a distorted, movement inside the work, but we couldn't have thought about that before. So it was like learning new things about the glass and how it behaves with mold making, and fusing it with other materials. You always get something you can't really expect. This has this surprise element, which is quite interesting, because this was kind of made in the moment. They specifically planned what to do, but that's why I loved working with this project, because it always brought different elements after the fact. But yeah, lots of connectivity here, and also movement with the rippling of the sound wave and the aquaticness and the fluidity of the pieces. That's what I want. Ultimately, I want to aim for that. I wanted to provide movement, because when you're back there in the islands, it's always movement.
It's life, isn't it? Yeah. It's the capturing that energy into the piece.
When you wake up, before work, after work, wherever you go, you feel this natural energy, which I always try to communicate in my work. So it's tricky. Because you don't want to repeat the same things, you want to try something new, and how can I? So the other work explores that. But yeah.
I think that one of the elements that is interesting between the two is that Tiffany was quite daring in his approach to glassmaking as well. He was the son of the famous Tiffany company in New York. They were all known for the jewelry. So he had wealth behind him, so he could allow himself to experiment and dare and take that risky approach that other glassmakers didn't have at the time. And it's interesting when you say we did something and then we realized afterwards, but it kind of worked. Because for a lot of things that they did at the time was kind of the same. They they were adding colors and chemicals as they were making the vases and looking at the processes. So things could have gone either way, but that gives it, scientifically speaking as well, some unique chemical fingerprints, basically, that you would not achieve in any other way if you weren't doing things while working the piece and seeing what the reaction is. So in a way, there is a similarity there as well, just on a different point of view, isn't it? And as you say, here we have the experience of the gaffle. We're lucky we have the name of the gaffle, but we don't have the identity of the glass blower as much as we can see in your piece.
It's more of a skill.
Exactly.
Capturing, or the process, which is quite interesting, as opposed to, literally, I would say, creating another dimension of myself into the work, How do you view sculpture? How can you play around with the dynamics of sculpture, not just doing something literally? How do you change that up and represent another realm of it, like thinking outside the box?
Yeah.
Which is was always a big thing for me, because so many of these processes have been done already, Venetian glass and Scandinavian glass, they've mastered it, I would like to try and master it, but what's the point of remastering something that's been mastered? It might as well try and kind of flip the script and just try something different,
Yeah.
In the technological age, why not?
Exactly.
So I think that's a lot of, I guess, the ethos of my making is to how can you look at different ways, and also, credit or celebrate the processes of old, but just kind of, reinvent it in a way, or adapt in my own making. So, so Axel was funded by Jahday Makers Open, and it was a project where I wanted to create the largest body of work, because it was a good amount of funding to experiment and try new things with this sort of fabrication industrial process, using molding and sort of I would say machine work. So we looked at axle as a form of rotation, as a force used for building things. So a lot of the rippling and the sound waves are actually from the computer. So I basically draw and model on the software, and then I send the same information to the 3D CNC machine. So it's basically the language, me and the computer talking to itself as we're making it, and then I sculpt it into the real world. So a lot of this work, and also Biome, is the same information but completely different characters, shapes, allowing the computer to express itself, and me not doing much, but just sending information. There's another artist who does the same, Michael Eden. Have you heard of him? He sends sort of barcodes and QR codes to a 3D printer, and then somehow he molds it into glass, but has a very traditional way of the work how it sits. So a lot of the work is kind of looking into the matrix and how I could pull out the information into the real world, but aesthetically make it look interesting, give it movement and rippling, and again representing back home, creating this whirlpool and this spinning, but also representing the industrial technique of rotation and force. And it's quite interesting against this, because it's more floral, more elastic and less, a bit more human, a bit more, it's not as computer aided.
Yeah. So. But there are elements of similarity, definitely, especially in the sculpting.
Yeah.
So those, I call it the flower form. This is part of a series of flower form pieces, and they were original from Italy and England. So this is again remarking a little bit the importance of the people behind the pieces, because a lot of people that worked with Tiffany actually were from England. So it is something to explore a little bit how different culture have impacted and then they have transformed. So definitely we take inspiration from Italian and English craftsmanship, and these are the most sculptural pieces. So they were the first distinct forms in the production of Tiffany. We can see it from these. This is actually made of two pieces. So we have a base where you can see is actually, we have a glaze underneath, and the whole piece is meant to simulate light and sun shining through. And if you don't do it in different stages, working on the color of the glass outside and then putting different layers inside, you will never achieve such an effect. And again, this idea of movement, because yours, as you say, is a spiral, is this almost turbine. Yeah. Well, this is the idea of the flower that is quite constrained because the stem is narrow, and also if you see how the glass is made, this striation with green and white accentuate these ideas of height, and then it almost explodes at the top. So it's just a different type of, there's force in both of them, just distributed differently. And it's not the best case for it, but I recommend everybody later to just have a look and, and peer inside. We have orange glaze and almost a golden iridescence inside that is crackling. And that is what gives that lovely effect that you can see. And it's almost when you look at a flower in real life that you can see there's something inside, that is life inside. And that's exactly what they were trying to do. But again, it's a sculptural piece that you will never put actual flowers or anything like that. It means exactly
for display, not
exactly. Yeah. So I think that's another element of similarity.
It's a very like Salvador Dali
almost
surrealism as well. Like it's like a, you know, it feels like a cartoon drawing. It doesn't feel like, it's more like outer realm type of, I'd say, styling is quite interesting. It's not as classical as
exactly.
stemware is. Yeah.
Exactly. But this is what they were doing. Like they were taking inspiration, but Tiffany had quite a unique niche taste that was his success and then his doom afterwards when the Art Deco came up. But you can see that there is a unique perspective. You can still see the plier marks at the top as well, and all this imperfection, all these marks, everything was part of the ethos that you don't hide these things. As nature is not perfect, why pieces should be perfect? Also, they make it really unique. Tiffany pieces will always have something like an air bubble, plier marks, something that you don't expect there, because they sort of embrace what you were saying before, this process of discovering as they were making as well. And I think here is, you mentioned a lot about the computing and the 3D software. They sort of had the same cutting edge approach at the time with science and chemistry. They didn't have as much as nowadays just because they didn't have the means. But the head chemist of Tiffany was English, was from Stourbridge, Arthur Nash. And the man responsible for achieving the iridescence is called Dr. Parker McKinley. And they were fundamental in creating all the colors and effects that you see here. And they were recognized as well at the time. If you think about the big universal expositions, not only Tiffany received prizes, but they received prizes for their science. So I think it was recognized, that element of innovation.
It's quite interesting
It is.
Because that's also using luster and iridescent color. If you keep adding it to the heat chamber, you can kind of make it even more metallic. But we didn't want it to be, we wanted to have some transparency, not too metallic, but you can see that iridescence at certain parts of the piece. So it's interesting that that was made in another time where they were experimenting and making it. And now it's like of today. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and for Tiffany, the iridescence again, he was fascinated by it from natural processes. He was lucky that the first archaeological digs were happening at the time, and an Italian archaeologist called Cesnola brought some pieces back to New York from Cyprus, and he could see the Roman glass naturally deteriorated and decayed in the ground that forms this sheen, this rainbow sheen on it, that is the natural iridescence. And then they tried to reproduce it in not a modern way, because people were doing it at the time, but he had a completely different feel to it. He wanted to achieve that spontaneity and that sort of sense of something that you could find in the ground, that you can find in nature, that it doesn't look forced, it doesn't look, as you say, it doesn't look too much, too metallic. It's always as a function.
Yeah, so it's quite a fun process. Reduction basically involves, this is how we've done it. You increase the gas content.
Okay.
So it starves the whatever material, it starves it of oxygen.
Yeah.
So when that happens, it metallicizes even more, it gets even more. So if you want something slight, you basically reduce it for, I'd say like 3 minutes. Just keep putting in, taking out. But if you wanted to go like metallic or mirrored, like or really dark and strong, almost like a fragment of a volcanic rock type, you can just continue to reduce it. And it goes like, full, you can't see through it anymore. It's like turning it into volcanic glass rock.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a fascinating technique. But for this, we only done it for a bit, like I'd say 2 minutes. We didn't want it to be too metallic because we wanted the transparency to give it more depth, more optics and movement. When you look up and down the piece, you can see the rippling effects. But it was a good pick. I didn't think about that.
And similar processes as well, because they started with adding different type of metallic oxides, lots of tin oxides, and then you deprive them of oxygen, and this reaction, this deprivation brings the luster pigments out. So sometimes they spray them as well, so either fumes or spray, and the fumes hatch into the glass. So depending on what effect you wanted to achieve, you would do it slightly differently, but when you talk about the volcanic rock, is exactly what they did in the next piece as well. So that's quite an interesting. He leads to another. Well, it shows that some things again is not that they don't change, but people do pick up on or technique or references through the time. It's just with different techniques and for different reasons, isn't it? Just used differently.
Yeah, and what's going on in the moment, you might be inspired by something else or just a process or maybe a theme of where you are, your surroundings. It all really depends. It's quite interesting when you start a new collection of work, or if you're making a product to sell, or if you're making a product to display or an installation, or you kind of go through these phases of what the product itself is, so I quite like diving into different elements, not just making stuff for a gallery, you know, maybe smaller things, what can go in someone's home or what people could take away, because then it creates another experience for the work. But it's really hard to do that because it costs like £500 just to make a day's work. So it's like, okay, how can I make tiny pieces, but, you know, break even, you know, so it's, tricky.
Yeah.
Tricky, but fun.
It is.
Yeah.
Cool. Any questions that you have on the pieces or anything that you think would like us to explore a little bit more?
I have a question. You spoke about Jahday. You said we in terms of your process. Do you work with a team, or how do you come up with your ideas?
Yeah. Most, if you're making smaller work, you can probably do it by yourself. But yeah, if you're making large pieces, you need a assistant, or someone to just pass you color, or and then you're also working in an institution too. You know, you get ideas from different people with experience. So sometimes it's a team effort. If it's a smaller piece, sometimes I could just go and do it myself. With this, because you're molding the work, you need lots of rotation and force. So sometimes it's good to have someone to help you spin the iron, so you can get more detail faster, rather than me just doing it, because I've got to blow and also spin. So it's like, it's pretty, and this is like, 30 minutes in where you're sweating it. So if you do a sixth piece, you just don't have the strength. It's quite, intense. But sometimes I just had to run away because the smoke was like, I was like, someone take it. And because it's a lot going on. So you need, also to have help, because glass it's one of the trickiest things to make, like the tiniest mistake cracks. Or have you seen Blown Away, anyone? Blown Away series? Yeah. So, they work on that for 2 hours, and then they go to put it in the kiln to anneal, and it just breaks. And they've got professional assistants, 2 people, and still it doesn't work, so crazy material, but you have to love it. It keeps you on
your toes.
Yeah,
They were in teams as well at Tiffany. It wasn't just one gaffel. There was the errand boy. There was the one that was bringing everything around. They were in team at about, I think, could be up to 5. So they needed people to help, because, as you say, think about the person who's holding that aquamarine can just be doing everything else as well. Yeah. So that element of collaboration now is seen as a little bit more equal, but it's just for the time. It would have been the equivalent of having assistants and internships and anything like that. But they did have a lot of help and work and plan, and everybody knew exactly what they were doing in order to make the product succeed.
Yeah, in America, they like to do everything big and crazy. So they literally get little cars with wheels to carry the work, because it's so big. Just put it on this little cart and it just rolls around where they need it, take it back, because it's so big. Not even another person could pick it up. But it's quite interesting how you work in a team and then use other, I guess, pieces of equipment to help the process. It gets quite intense when you're there. You've got to see it you got to feel the heat, and you're just like, okay, it's no joke. So
I have a question, actually, especially with the 3D part, the 3D programming, and then the translation into the physical piece. Is there anybody that you collaborated with that inspired you and made you slightly change or do differently things, or how does that part work?
Yeah, well, the brief, this was made like in my last year of university. So that was with Joseph Hillary, and he was I'd say, he had a variety to his practice, but he done furniture, CNC work, and also SolidWorks, which is a program for furniture making. So we basically introduced the glass and the process to his work, and we worked out, how can we capture or freeze a moment in time, and that's where that discussion began. So it depends on what the project is or how you're working with it. But it's a good question. Trying to think what else is kind of close to that. Michael Eden, he inspired. He used also rotating forms as well to get sort of the contour of a face. He'd create that pattern in wood and also try and get the face of I think it was a Barbara Hepworth. I think there was a project they were doing, but looking at shapes and contours, he inspired the work. Zaha Hadid, if you know, Zaha Hadid. That was an incredible architecture sort of game changer. So her work was really like how you can really push organic forms and allow shapes and structures to flow and have fluidity. She changed the game for that. So there's different elements inspire, but all of it's from, I'd say, from my origin back home. Like the naturalism of the work is just always in there, in some format, for sure. So
I have a question. When do you know when to leave it alone?
When it's finished.
When is it finished?
So with this it's a bit different because it's like sculptural. It's in the moment. They will have discussions throughout it, like, oh, maybe change that, but this is more of a conceptual piece where we had to capture the wave pattern of me blowing the glass. So we wanted to freeze that moment in time. So once we mold it, that's it. And you just start to basically cool it, make sure it is at the right temperature before you put it into the kiln, because if it's too hot, it could literally move in the kiln. So then you lose the shape. It destroys the whole concept of the work. So you kind of want it to be as frozen as possible, but hot. Yeah.
You talked a bit about the blue work and kind of that you didn't expect to see those waves on the interior of the glass. And I wondered, with your kind of collaboration with technology between you as the artist and the computer, how often does the computer surprise you and do things that you're not expecting? Because I think when you think about an artisan skill, you think about things happening naturally a lot that are unexpected, and maybe with a computer you expect, or you might assume it would be more rigid. But I was wondering how many times it surprises you.
I'd say I surprise it sometimes, and then it surprises me, because it's like if you're producing work, it's always stages, So even if you're working with like knitting, you've got to start somewhere. So I wouldn't really know what to do if I don't try, experiment. So I'm kind of telling it what to do, and then it might want to do something else when I put it into a 3D format. And then I find out what it's doing in a 3D format that I can't really envision in the computer because you've not brought it into the real world, So it's always like a back and forth, like conversation with that process. But I try not to just always work with it because, you need naturalism in your making. So it's not a piece, not work here. Actually, there's a piece over there that's more sculpted, handmade. It's like using both. But you need to try both things, because then I'm directly with the glass. I can build with it and not depend on the computer to it has to sit like this. I have to put a certain size for the base, so it allows it to keep stable. It's really intricate things that you don't think about, because you'll do a piece this big, and then if you don't design the foot right, it could just fall. So you always kind of like, it depends on me to make it exist, you know, which is quite interesting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. So any questions?
Just one more.
Yeah.
Looking at these here, your work is so close to perfection with the computerized sort of forms and things. It's getting more and more perfect all the time. Do you think it makes the Tiffany look old-fashioned and fuddy-duddy and sort of not too natural for its own good?
I think it's more of a question of evolution, you know. If you compare anything from then and now, it's going to evolve in some way, but it wouldn't really get there if it wasn't for the old classical, you know, craftsy stuff, you know, like the Swedish patterns that you see on glass. Is like there's people doing that in another way now. So it's like, yeah, I don't know. I think you kind of need that old look to get the new look, or you need to start somewhere, I guess. Yeah.
Maybe it's the pieces you've chosen, but there doesn't seem to be any flaws in any of them.
Yeah.
No air bubbles.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, but also like there's air bubbles in some of my work that you want there. You want it to express aqua, you know, sort of aquatic and sort of natural features, not just too computerized. So it depends on the work, but yeah.
Maybe a danger. They could become too.
No. You can always cancel that out, you know.
Yeah.
So the piece.
Error in.
Yeah, there's a piece over there that has a sculptural stopper. You know, we've done that aside from the computer, you know, processing. So it's like you can always play around with it.
Yeah.
Just like AI, you know, you don't want to give it too much control.
Yeah.
You want it to, you want to still have your hands on it.
You still want to be in control.
Yeah.
But also that element of evolution as well, because if you think about Tiffany, he did an evolution himself, looking on not only at pieces in the past, but some of the European contemporary pieces. So if you look at the web in the other part that has the perfect iridescence, the metallic finish, Tiffany gave it a completely new life, and that looked fresh at the time, that looked new. So it's just something different, just a different step in evolution that then, as you say, matches with the different times, matches with the different technologies, and how we see the pieces in the society with the knowledge of the previous things that have been done in the past. So I think evolution can change in itself and doesn't necessarily mean from imperfect to perfect, or the other way around. It's just how we interpret it and how the concept comes out that changes, I think.
And you've got work from this era that looks like it was made yesterday.
Yeah.
You know, there's some work I've seen, I'm just like, you look at the date and it's like 50 years old. Yeah. You know, it's especially Scandinavian glass. You know.
There is one, the Cypriot vase, isn't it? And it looks like it's been made in the 80s.
Yeah.
1980s,
1880s. Yeah. It's interesting.
And as a joint, would you like to tell us about how you're evolved from the previous pieces to this one?
Yeah, so this was thinking about interior. So I thought, why not push the sort of like a computerized sculpting and make it a bit more functional, give it a purpose. So it's quite interesting. The first pieces that were bought was by, I think, the granddaughter of Klaus Stauffenberg. He was one of the biggest people to basically try and take out Hitler. And he basically has had an art collection connected through to his granddaughter, and then she bought two of the pieces. I'm not sure why, I think it was how she connected with the work. But this was like, that was the first sales I made in London, of course, because that can only happen in London. Crazy. And it was a really interesting process because we didn't want to just keep it computerized. When we're looking at different coding and how to embed the coding into the glass, I wanted to give it a function. So if it's going to be used as a water glass, a water vessel, or for wine, or any of the smaller pieces we've got, you know, how do we stop, you know, dust and natural elements from getting in? So we sculpted a piece separate to that to create a stopper. And yeah, these are made more for the home and gallery, I guess. But I didn't want to just keep making gallery stuff about 2 years ago. So I was like, okay, how can I make this more functional? Yeah. And yeah, it's been quite interesting. People's, you see it on dining room tables, and it's quite fun to change it up, not just have it, for display, or you can't touch it and you can't, I like the work to have some involvement in people's lives as well. So
there's another parallelism there because, of course, what we get asked more often when we come at the gallery is some of our star pieces and the lamps. But actually what Tiffany was most famous for at the time was the stained glass windows and the mosaics. And those were commissioned for big buildings like big banks, or if you think about churches with the stained glass windows. And then we have a little bit of element of a more private view in which you have desk pieces, like letter stops and the boxes that you can see in the room just on your right. And then you have pieces made for exposition, like some of them in this room. So the production there as well was diversified and meant something different, and you can see different taste going in then and different expertises as well. We have mostly samplers here in the collection, but we do have one of the finished mosaic over there that is not signed, but we believe stylistically that is attributed to Joseph Briggs, and that we think is a finished piece. But it's interesting to look at all the different examples and to see on how they would have related outside of the museum in the actual world, and with commissioners, taste of commissioners, because of course the mosaics had to go through people that said, okay, I like the color, I don't like the shape, we change things around. So it's something that maybe we don't think about that way. Well, there is that element of outside opinion and outside knowledge as well that is taken into consideration in some of them.
And these any of these are functional, would you say? None.
Well, that one, the stopper is functional, and this is why we put it in as well, to sort of have a dialogue with yours. But that is one of the pieces that has actually a functionality in real life as well. So if you compare the two of them, there's quite a starkly different between the two.
Interesting. Yeah. And also the color coordination as well.
Yes, like there is. And the veins as well. So I know that ours is a more this element of the iridescence, but all three of them have this glow that is almost like fire and the lava inside in yours as well. And this all the effects on how the glass manages to convey lights and just give us this feeling of warmth and light, but just in different ways. And I loved the fact that I could see some little specks of dark in yours and the vein that are in both pieces as well, just in different ways.
Yeah, it was really fun experimenting with the stopper as a sculptural piece, because I was thinking, how can I make the piece feel inviting, embodying yourself. And so we sculpted I'd say an inner, what would you call it? An inner sphere, yeah?
Yeah, it's almost a stalagmite as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's that element that...
So you feel like you're being sort of like...
Constricted.
Yeah, constricted, but also you're being held into the piece. You're part of the piece. Yeah. It's embodying forms within something, as a vessel. So this inner sphere is like solid orange, and then it has a layer of clear glass around it, and then you sandblast to pretty much ghost out the inner form. So it gives this this hidden entity in it. It makes you want to pick it up. It's not just like a solid stopper. I want to see how can you engage with the work and I actually want to look at this as a separate piece. Yeah. You're not just forming of the glass, looking at how sculpturally it could kind of, you connect to it, you know. It's just quite fun to experiment with that.
Yeah, we've definitely done it. As I say, when we put it in the case, we have picked up the stopper and looked at it. It's just come naturally, doesn't it? To look at those different parts and to engage with the piece in a different ways as well.
For sure. Yeah. I think that's quite similar to the axle piece. Trying to think what else is quite different. Similar step process, you know, like, as other information. So the computer done a completely different shape when I was telling, all right, this is the size it's going to be. And then you send tons of information and it starts to have these wave patterns, or I would say, so obscurities to the way when you send the coding to the CNC work, and you just letting it kind of evolve itself and letting it kind of giving it room to play, you know, as a form. So it's always quite fun to try different information from the computer, and how we could create another language, and that's saying that and this is saying that in its own way.
Do you play much with sizes and dimension, or is something that you do more in the programming phase, or do you change it once you see how it's going to be in the physical form?
It'll be the programming. So you basically program the size you want, because that needs to get sent to the CNC. And once it's the shape of the mold, you can't really change the wood, because that's what you're molding. But for the axle, we sculpted a separate piece to kind of, you know, lift it up and give it more drama, and you know, so that was quite interesting. And again, with this, you know, sculpting another dynamic to the work and playing around with what's possible, not just creating your standalone vessel, was quite a big development for this work. I want more work in interior or homes, or, you know, but you need a backing for that. You know, you need a company or brand to maybe fund that. And when I do it on my own accord, is very minimal. You know, very minimal, because you want to, a lot of the work I go to make has to be done because I don't have a studio. You know, so it makes it tricky. When you go, you want to just actually get the work that needs to get done. So the molding process, it even helps even more, because I can make 10 pieces in a day. You know, just there's no tons of experimentation. All of that was done before. So I'm in the studio, I need to make that, and then try and shift them. So it's always changing, but it's tricky. Yeah. If that answers. Yeah. Yeah? Cool.
Is that because there's a bigger market for people who want to buy sculpture?
Yeah.
Than interiors?
Yeah. Again, it always changes, yeah. I'd done a wine vase collection in May. So that was 5 pieces. And, you know, the company basically, you know, allowed me to do my own thing. But, you know, they wanted a specific thing, you know. But I couldn't just go make some experimental glasses, because it just costs too much. In university, I was able to do that because we've got the facilities. So the next step for me is to do a master's with a site, you know, because I won't be able to really explore anything, just constantly hiring out. It's it's tough. So when I do the master's, it will help with what you're saying. You know, I'll be able to really push without depending on specific things to make. Yeah. But funding's also good. So if you get a grant to be commissioned with something, then you can explore. But they come every other season. Yeah. It's tricky.
Yeah, for us it was quite interesting, especially when we talk with the flower form and the aquamarine, because those are normally vases that are standalone in the cases. And it was quite interesting to have them compared to something contemporary. And as we said, vibrant, but just in a different way. Like we never realized on the colors of the aquamarine how different they looked to us when we compared them to Jahday pieces. Even just the pebble effect on the seabed, the bruise and the greens, almost browns, really do get out completely different when we have such a clear and light piece next to it. Something that I myself personally did not observe like that before, and we also talked about how light affected the pieces as well, because it was the first time for me to try and move it and try to have the light sharing on the two and bringing out the best. Lighting, as people know, is not the easiest thing you can have in the museum, and we're lucky that this is actually quite new, but they're so carefully placed that even just moving them a little bit, it changes completely how you look at them. So I think that for me was the main, and for this one as well, it was really, we don't normally have the stopper in here. We have other example of lava and Cypriot vases. So it was quite interesting to have the piece conversating with something different that didn't diminish it in any way, just brought different aspects, as we were talking about, that the fire or that lava effect that just looked even more remarked with the other two in the case. So for us, for me, it's been very, very interesting, and it did good to us to have a refresher and looking at the pieces in a different way that we wouldn't have had the chance if it wasn't for Jahday pieces.
Yeah, and also how it's placed is huge for a glass piece, because if you've got light coming up, it creates a whole nother sort of display of the different characteristics of the glass.
Yeah.
If you've just got spotlight, it kind of has a blanket over so many aspects. Now that you've got light coming up from beneath, I'm kind of seeing the sort of like whirlpool and rippling in that piece a lot more now, as opposed to just a one spotlight. So it all depends on how you place work and how you place it. The lighting is a big thing.
Yeah. And natural light and museum light are very different. When we took the pieces out, we actually brought them there 1 second at the window, because they won't look at like this. As I say, some of the pieces, imagine them on a column, lighted by natural light, not like that in the case, because even just this layer of glass put another layer, a different perspective on it. So even just the process of placing them and looking at them like that has been quite interesting.
Yeah, and like you say, what was discovered was definitely the form of sort of crystallizing and iridescence, and kind of the time it was made is really eye-opening, and how they're experimenting way back then and how it's used now, but still connected in a way. That was really interesting. And this the iridescence on the piece there, and how you can stretch it, and that was a big interesting realization.
And there was that synergy as well between, Joseph Vic Studio we're using maths and science.
Yes, exactly.
The tools of the chemist.
Yeah.
Yes.
Take up the time.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Contrasting what you do now using the most modern techniques, additive manufacturing.
And also questioning what's possible, and how you could re-envision the material. They were doing the same thing. And that's what happens when you really think about a material. Is like, this is it's interesting, this technique, but how do you create new techniques? How do you really question the material itself, which is what they were doing, which is how you connect.
Yes, exactly. Questioning what you do and what you have in front of you is pivotal in in both, because you had similar materials going on at the time, both the way they did it and the people behind them, how they apply this technique and these materials really made all the difference. And it's a little bit what you're doing now as well, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're curious about any art form, you're gonna, you want to try new things, it's just, and naturally I've never been one to just like stick to, old age techniques, and I'm too curious to find out what else is possible for the material, even with wood, not just glass itself. Experimenting with like wood and textures and patterns is also part of my practice. So it all kind of has this elasticity, it's always moving, which is really important to keep me, I don't know, interested. I get bored quick. I need to be like, okay, I've done that. What's next? So.
And Jahday, you spoke a little bit about your work situation in terms of workspace, and that you don't have a permanent space anymore. Can you just kind of talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about what was the conditions and that sort of led, and what happened has led to, and what's happening in terms with glass makers now and makers who sort of rely on things like kilns and furnaces? Yeah,
it's a really endangered craft, especially with energy prices going up, and then also just general funding to be able to go and make the work like that. A lot of the courses around the country, I think 3 now that's shut down, Wolverhampton, Sunderland, I think one other, but I can't remember. But it's one of those things where it's like the road's getting more narrow, and it's like, how do you adapt to that? So a lot of the work I would basically, just do a chameleon and somehow, just like go and work in this space for a bit, and then maybe experiment for a bit, for I'd say about a week, and then go back, hopefully get some funding, and then maybe come back to that idea. I can't just do it all at once, like in university. So a lot of it's chop and changing and maneuvering with how the industry's, maneuvering. As opposed to clay artists, where like you can set up your own workshop in your home, which I really do envy, because you can experiment as you need to. But it's a really endangered craft, which is like it's not really a highlight on it. It's like whatever saves us the outgoings, maybe we don't need. It's a interesting mentality with it at the minute, but also, it's huge, the heritage and culture behind it, and even like the pieces that were made from the artists in the Tiffany collection, they ventured to the Caribbean to make new work way back then. So it's like it's not happening as much because it requires funding, so it's like it's a whole other thing. It's how can we continue it? So they're looking at other ways. So they're looking at a lot of kiln stuff now, or smaller glass, facilities. So it's not burning as much fuel. It's tricky. So I do not have the answer. It's a tough one. The American industry, they've got tons of resources, so they're able to, have big programs there. That's quite, it's prospering. But the UK is a bit, they're nice with glass making.
Is there a sense that the UK doesn't have the same appreciation of the craft of glass making, do you think?
Or just the how do you call it? The agenda is different here. It's like we don't need that program. Whereas other countries is like, it's a staple of the heritage and culture and the art. But here it's like, we need that funding elsewhere. So it's the mentality, because I went to Finland, it was just like, wow, you know, they don't let that go, you know, finished glass. And they've got this glass display of like a meteor, you know, like it landed on Earth, and it's like, you know, like intergalactic glass. It's just like, you know, but they celebrate that. It's like a thing, you know, but they just want it. So hopefully, yeah, the funding could come, but it's it's.
I guess it's that thing about, because what you do may be seen as luxury, and at the moment, you know, people often have that conversation about art as luxury now, and it comes to things like funding. You're part of the Black Artisans exhibition and presentation that we're doing here at Haworth Art Gallery. So you've got one of the large portraits downstairs of you in your workspace.
Okay.
Which
Great.
workspace is that you're in there?
It might have been St. Helens or maybe Sunderland. Yeah, either or. Because there's two shots of. Yeah, there's been a lot of moments like that. But yeah, hopefully, you know, with the new government, the direction is a bit different. Because definitely wasn't on the Tories' agenda, art and culture. So yeah, hopefully we could get some more support for that, and the universities could kind of have a connection there too, because to connect postgrad and university, that's what we was talking about earlier. That's the most important bit, you know. And I didn't really have a post besides doing a master's, and that's like, yeah, it's a big thing to go for. So doing residencies and just kind of making my way through, it's like, but yeah, there's more support and linkage between the two. Yeah, that would be a big step. But
and in terms of the cost of producing work, I mean, I know that some makers are now experimenting in using recycled glass, but that's not suitable for every maker, because you can only use it in certain ways.
So
maybe for smaller stuff maybe, but not even jewelers want to use recycled glass sometimes. Really, what's happening in that space that's interesting in terms of, you know, how a craft like making glass sort of sits with ideas about environmental issues and circular economy, and what's happening in terms of your space that's interesting.
Yeah, so they're doing a lot of the experimental sort of upcycling and sort of like, redeveloping glass bottles and stained mirrors and glass and things that, you know, you just don't want to put to waste. So trying to use that again, but then it's like, ultimately the quality of a piece that's gonna, you know, make big money to then reinvest, if it's all recycled glass, is that wanted as much? If it's not in like the Saatchi gallery, you know, there might be wanted, but then if you're putting in all of the inequality, I would say the qualities that aren't like as perfect as this, you know, is it going to be viable or sellable? You know, so they're trying to do it, but then how is that breaking to the market? That's the question, you know, because collectors and international collectors, they want the quality, but if everyone's doing recycled glass, you know what? Yeah, it's a tricky one.
It's like how to join the current demand with the current trend and issues that are around, isn't it? You need to have them coexist. Otherwise, you're gonna have an imbalance either way.
And Tiffany used a lot of recycled glass.
Yeah, they call it.
And that's why you find a lot of air bubbles in the pieces that you see. But obviously, his work was seen as luxury items, even though it was made from recycled glass.
It's the name that allows it to continue and exist. So there's a demand, but 80% of the makers of industry can't do that, you know.
And
it's tricky.
And even then, you know, at the beginning of the company, we mentioned Arthur Nash before. Actually, the company was called Stourbridge Glass Company, and they had shared artistic control. But then the furnaces burnt down, and Nash didn't have that wealth to that investment that Tiffany had. So then is when the artistic control passed to Tiffany and the name changed as well. So some elements were a struggle back at the time as well. And then
Save the company pretty
exactly. But the only way was somebody else needed to have the bigger share, and was the person with the biggest funds. So that dynamic is still quite relevant, isn't it?
Yeah.
And in Tiffany, was the main element of the work you mentioned before about stained glass
windows and mosaics? Yes, this was what you was requested the most, like when you're talking about what really people commissioned to them, and then you have the nichest pieces like the lamps, like even the vases that are most of them exhibition pieces. They weren't what they were most known for at the time. So they still did have in mind what the current demand was, and they accommodated that, but also what their taste was and what they're wanting to experiment was at the time. And they could do both because of the wealth behind it. Yeah. While other glassmakers, and we talk about the European glassmakers, we compare it mostly with the Austrian, with Loetz, you can see mostly the differences, and the differences that dictated from financial demands. The choosing the elements on how to do things, which materials to use, and what production to make as well. So that's quite interesting to compare them on that side as well.
Yeah. So, just talking about this.
Yes, it goes on forever.
Can we talk about ceramics, you know?
They tried for a while and then they gave it up.
Yeah. You never get bored. Yeah.
You've now got me thinking, because you mentioned about how the team, the studio, and Tiffany used to go and explore in the Caribbean for getting to research their work, and it makes me think about Josie Briggs and his mixed race family, and it makes me think about maybe how
which expertise and which imprint that could have been. Definitely the fact that they had, as I say, a lot of the workers were from England. A lot of the workers had experiences elsewhere too. So you bring together a mix of culture and expertises. And Tiffany was a great artistic director. He knew where talent was and how to use it and spot all these different personalities and bring them together. It's said that we don't know more about them, but definitely they were recognized, they were seen, and it's visible in all the pieces that you see, because without those people, they would not have achieved all of that. Tiffany self-trained as an artist, but wasn't a glassmaker, wasn't a chemist. So that's different.
One of the practicalities of experimentation.
And exactly.
The creating an industry standard, So they created one of the first lusters and creating, so it's like more of they started to become the industry. Yeah. Not just making glass, but how you make it. Yeah,
they set a trend. Definitely after a while you could see that it's like history, isn't it? It's very European-centric, and then is expand. And the glass was very European-centric, the tendencies and the fashions. And then you can see when Tiffany started to do this universal exposition, like the one in Paris in the 1900s, there's a new protagonist, there's somebody who's bringing a different element to the mix, and you can see the axe shifting to the state.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, anyone else?
At what point did you become inspired to get involved into the glasswork? So was it a moment that...
Just sort of like making glass? It was interesting because the first few months in my first year in uni, it didn't really interest me. It was lots of like lamp working, bead making, and like small stuff. And I was just a bit, didn't really excite me as like, I want to try. And then the sort of blowing techniques and sculpting large pieces using metal and wood in all of the different facilities at the Manchester School of Art was like a epiphany moment. It was like, oh, this is possible. Oh, you can use wood and glass. You can use metal and glass. And glass was like the adaptive medium you know? It was like such an adaptive thing that made sense to me. Because I didn't want to just work with one thing, you know? But I've always been, interested in trying, you know, going beyond what's the standard thing to do. So I was in the workshops of other materials, close to as much as in the glass, you know. So I was in metal a lot and wood, but the glass was always the interchanging element there. So, and that was first year of uni. And I first saw it in Bermuda when I was, I think, about 9, 8. So that was like the first time I saw it, but I didn't come back to it until uni. So it's like a full circle moment,
Quite a similarity with Tiffany as well, because we said he trained as an artist and then he was mainly interested in interior design, so he didn't brand himself as the glassmaker. He was the interior, the whole thing. And then he had his own bronze furnaces as well, so we're having the element of metal as well, and a lot of glass simulate other elements. So there is the sort of playing with the material. There are some of the samplers that are marble, mother of pearl, so we do have a lot of playing, and the glass being the central element that puts them together. And as I say, they tried a little for a while with the ceramics, both Tiffany and Joseph Briggs, and they didn't continue, neither of them. But the only piece of the collection that we have signed by Joseph is a ceramic.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jahday.